David Koresh was born Vernon Howell on August 17, 1959, and raised by his young mother and grandparents. As a child, David was hyperactive, dyslexic, and had a learning disability. He was placed in a special needs class, and was bullied by his classmates. When his mother married, David was passed back and forth between his grandparents and mother. David later revealed that he was abused by his stepfather and sexually abused by other boys. Koresh dropped out of school in the 11th grade and earned money as a carpenter and handyman. David became fascinated with the Bible and memorized a majority of the New Testament. He started attending Seventh-day Adventist Church in Tyler, Texas. The pastor and congregation were mesmerized with his passion for the Bible and knowledge of scriptures. David said that he had a vision from God, who told him that he was to marry the pastor's teenage daughter. The pastor forbade David from seeing his daughter. However, this did not stop David from having a relationship with her. Koresh stated that he had more visions and alleged that God called on him to be his prophet. He became spellbound with the Book of Revelation. The Book of Revelations portrays images of beasts, sinister horsemen and natural disasters that are complex and often understood to signify the final confrontation between heaven and hell, the end of times as we know it. David started becoming disruptive during services where he would rant and rave about his revelations and interpretations. The church asked him to leave because of his outbursts and ongoing relationship with the pastor's young daughter. Shortly after he moved to Waco, Texas, he started attending the Mount Carmel church where he met the leader Lois Rodan, who was known as a living prophet of God. David started having an affair with Lois, who was in her late 60s. Lois allowed Koresh to start conducting seminars at the church titled Serpent's Roots. Members of the church believed that Koresh was a prophet. He became the co-leader of the church. Lois's son George was not happy with the changes in the leadership and the relationship between his mother and Koresh. George filed a lawsuit in federal court alleging that Koresh had raped his mother and brainwashed her into turning her back on her son. Koresh decided to leave the church but vowed that he would be back to regain control. Some members followed David's lead because they were devoted to him and his teachings. They started their own communal settlement and church. At the age of 25, David married Rachel Jones, who was only 14 years old, and the daughter of one of the most influential members of the Branch Davidians. He fathered one son and two daughters with his wife. During a trip to Israel in 1985, he claimed to have another vision. Russian cosmonauts reported seeing 7 angelic creatures in space flying towards Earth. Koresh claimed that he met with the angels near Mount Zion, and they explained to him the final mysteries of the book Revelations. For the next 2 years he concentrated on spreading his word and recruiting people in and out of the United States to join his crusade. In 1987, George Rodan became leader of David's former church, the Mount Carmel Church, and challenged Koresh to a contest to see who could raise a person from the dead. George had a body exhumed for the contest. Koresh filed a complaint with the sheriff. Koresh provided pictures of the coffin, but the sheriff told him the pictures did not provide sufficient evidence that a body had been exhumed. David and 7 of his followers returned to Mount Carmel dressed in camouflage and armed with military-style rifles and shotguns. A shootout ensued between the two groups. Members from both churches were arrested. After a 2-week trial, Koresh and his followers were found not guilty of attempted murder. All guns were returned to Koresh and his followers because in Texas no conviction, no seizure, and they had a constitutional right to their guns. George's charges were also dropped. However, it didn't take long for him to get into trouble again. George was charged with murder of a man and stated that Koresh sent him. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity and was committed to a mental institution, where he later died. Now that George was out of the way, Koresh knew that he could regain control of Mount Carmel. Koresh's followers gave him money to pay off overdue property taxes and move himself and followers in. This was the new home of the Branch Davidians, a religious commune that was home to around 100 people. The group made money by operating different businesses such as an auto repair shop, seamstress business, and gun show booth, where they bought and sold firearms and military-style survival gear. Wealthy members of the church also provided Koresh with a lot of his money. Koresh manipulated his followers into doing what he wanted, when he wanted, and anyone who questioned him was banished. He announced in 1989 his New Light vision, which gave him the right to have sex with all unmarried followers, including young girls. Some followers questioned his vision and left the church, stating that God does not allow this. Koresh later convinced his wife and her family that he got a message from God, that he was to father a child with his wife's young 12-year-old sister. His wife and family did not object, because they were blinded by Koresh and believed anything he told them. Koresh made changes to his New Light doctrine, stating that he was to have sex with any married women he wanted, and told their husbands that they were to not have any sexual contact with their wives. His followers were devoted and believed what he told them. He said that it was God's plan. Koresh fathered 17 kids. While a lot of his followers believed that this was God's will, others began to question the sexual exploitation of the women and young girls. His actions triggered a series of lawsuits, custody battles, and women started to leave the compound to protect their children. Koresh knew that authorities were investigating him. The Texas Department of Child Protective Services visited the compound to investigate claims of abuse, that children were being disciplined with wooden spoons. The sexual abuse continued and David started losing followers. On August 28, 1990, Vernon Howell legally changed his name to David Koresh. He stated that he chose his name because he was professing himself to be the spiritual descendant of King David, and believed that he would become physical ruler of his new kingdom. It wasn't until a delivery person reported seeing large number of hand grenades and explosive materials that authorities started a thorough investigation. The investigation uncovered that the compound had purchased over 200 firearms. The majority of these guns were semi-automatics, and none of these weapons were registered to the Branch Davidians. Koresh and his followers knew that they were being investigated. Helicopters would fly over the compound, and undercover ATF agents were showing interest in becoming members. Custody suits continued against Koresh, and former Branch Davidians were testifying against him. The sexual misconduct against the young girls in the compound caught the media's attention, and they started looking into the compound. Koresh felt the pressure from the authorities and the media. He started brainwashing his followers, telling them that they must prepare for war, that society and the U.S. government was corrupted and plotting against them. Koresh and followers started planning how they would fight against the government if they entered their compound. The ATF finally obtained a search warrant because they believed that Koresh and his members had illegal automatic weapons in their possession. On February 28, 1993, the ATF went to deliver their search warrant. Koresh opened the door and calmly stated that there were children in sight and he was not going to comply. Shots were exchanged for 2 hours between ATF agents and members inside the compound. This triggered a 51-day standoff. Several ATF agents and Branch Davidians were killed and wounded. Koresh was shot in the hand and torso. The FBI intervened and surrounded the compound and started negotiations with Koresh. The FBI underestimated the power that Koresh had over his followers. His followers were devoted and were not going to give up without a fight. The FBI tried many different tactics and none of them seemed to have worked. On April 19, after 51 days of failed negotiations and tactics, the FBI decided to fire tear gas into the compound. A fire started once the tear gas was shot, but it's still unclear whether the tear gas caused it or if Koresh and his people started the fire. The fire spread quickly throughout the compound, causing large explosions. Everyone in the compound except 9 followers died. Koresh did not die in the fire. He died from a bullet to his forehead, supposedly from another follower. Sadly, many women and children died that day, all because they believed in what Koresh preached. Koresh showed signs of a charismatic leader. He was charming and persuasive. Charismatic leaders are driven by their convictions and commitment to their cause. Koresh believed he was a prophet and was chosen by God to teach others. His devotion to his beliefs mesmerized his followers with his knowledge of the Bible. He was a confident leader who had the ability to influence and inspire his followers. Koresh also had characteristics of an authoritarian leader, a leader who dictates and controls all decision in a group. This type of leader is all about control. Koresh definitely got a kick out of being in control and setting his own rules.